Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video. This is me, Jonathan M.S. Pearce, giving you an update on the morning in UK time on the 14th of September. There has been quite a bit going on down in the southern Kherson region and not a lot of movement in the northern areas around the Kharkiv offensive. There's quite a bit to talk about with regards to what we have subsequently learnt about the twin offensives and how much preparation sort of went into that with regard to cooperation from allied nations, particularly the US and the UK. But let's just have a little walk through the front lines and talk about what's been going on. So this overall bird's eye view of Ukraine shows us the current front lines as according to War Mapper, Ukrainian War Map. The Twitter handle. It's well worth following. As you can see, this yellow area is completely liberated area that the Ukrainians have taken back from the Russians. What is important to note is that there is, even though the Russians have retreated past the border, there is still fire taking place across the border. It's not completely quiet. There is still an exchange of different forms of fire across the border. And, I guess nothing's ever quiet on any given front in a war. Even if there's stalemate, for example, down the sort of Donetsk front line, even though there's been pretty much stalemate for a number of months, there is still vicious fighting going on. So, quiet doesn't necessarily mean quiet. But what is interesting is that Kharkiv, I think last night was the first night Kharkiv has not had a rocket attack. That's monumentous. That's really important reflection of what's going on, and possibly that the Russians have retreated past the border, such that the only thing that can really hit Kharkiv are long-range rockets, and possibly, Russia wants to use them elsewhere, or is running out, or whatever. But for whatever the reason, Kharkiv had a quiet night, which is fantastic news. Okay, so let's go and have a little look closer in at this Kharkiv offensive going along the Seversky Donets River. What in fact, let's have a look first at more of a close in here. So zoom in to that Oskil River front. So what's happened is the Ukrainians have taken a bit of a breather to reconstitute their forces and sort out the logistics. The problem with that, they need to do that, right? But the flip side is that the Russians can now form, the longer it takes, the more of a defensive line they can form on the eastern side of the Oskil River. In other words, there's a dilemma for the Ukrainians. The quicker they can continue the momentum of this offensive, the more off guard the Russians will be, and the less, defensive their capabilities will be. Or less capable their defences will be. But of course, they can't overextend themselves, the Ukrainians. They need to make sure they go in, with decent logistics behind them and being well supplied, and with the right equipment and the right number of troops. So there's your dilemma. They are also waiting, I guess, to see what happens in Lyman and Lysychansk. There are these little bridgeheads across the Seversky Donetsk River. So here's that river that is joined by the Oskil here. So as you can see, around the Izium, the city or town of Izium, the areas are still somewhat contested. To the south and to the east, some of these towns are still contested between the Ukrainians and the Russians. Izium itself is liberated, and there is, there are troops to the north of Seversky Donetsk River, but to the west of the Oskil. to the east of the Oskil, there is still Russian control, broadly speaking, and it's only around Lyman where there is an element of Ukrainian control north of the river. So this is an incredibly important sort of launching pad if the Ukrainian offensive is going to continue. So there's an argument that they need to sort of have a two-pronged attack up from here and eastwards along the line. Maybe from sort of Kupiansk area, there's a sort of tiny bridgehead somewhere around here. Either way, this is really important for an eventual march through Luhansk and onto Donetsk. And there is some good reason. So, for example, War in Ukraine, the YouTube channel who does an awful lot of quality analysis, really thinks that Donetsk, the city of Donetsk, should be the next. So Donetsk, just to let you know, we zoom in here. So that's the city of Luhansk, Donetsk, Horlivka. The city of Donetsk should be the next major objective for the Ukrainians. So in order to do that, they are going to need to flank the Russians and probably have a two-pincered attack. Now we're going to talk about what originally the Ukrainians had in mind for this set of counter-offensives that we've seen. And there's been a lot of wargaming going on. But essentially, there are some people that think Donetsk should be the next major objective. And in order to do that, you are going to need some major forces surrounding it because you aren't going to do a full frontal attack on the city. That's not really what the Ukrainians want to do. They don't want to destroy their own cities. So it's about encircling the cities. And there has been rumour of forces amassing down here. And so you could expect some kind of pincer movement eventually. But we'll have to see how that goes. It's basically we're on sort of tenterhooks to see what happens along the Oskil and how quickly that materializes. So there is, just to let you know, that there are two forms of attack you can do. There's plenty of forms of attack. But down in Kherson, we have something called attritional warfare. And up in the Kharkiv area, it's maneuver warfare. So this is known as terrain-orientated attack. And this is a force-orientated attack, which means you're attacking a force here, whereas a Kharkiv is all about the terrain. And it was a lightning-quick, incisive counter-offensive where the Ukrainians used really light, very quick transport. They didn't use a lot of tanks to do their territorial gaining here. They got in behind the Russians and used really quick transport to get them to Kupiansk and the Oskil River. And therefore, being in behind the Russians caused loads of panic and the Russians fled. In Kherson, the Russians just can't do that. And actually, I think this particular map representing Kherson here is not quite as accurate as the latest indications show. But here, this is much more attritional. And it's not about the quick transport to get you behind the lines. It's about, forcing your way through the lines using troops and heavy equipment, tanks and artillery and howitzers. Which is artillery, rockets and artillery. Now, what we have in Kherson is still this attritional warfare that's going on. And there are varying maps because when you have a fog of war, when you have operational security, you have a lack of information coming out of war zones and theatres like this. So, for example, the Institute for the Study of War suggests that there's progress being made in the Kherson area. The Vidi Brid is being hotly contested at the moment. And this salient going in here, this bridgehead that's been formed, is increasing, and there's also evidence that actually the north is caving in a little bit as well. War in Ukraine, as the YouTuber has suggested, actually that this advance in the north is more pronounced, And in fact, there's a question mark to suggest whether the Ukrainians have advanced as far as the Dnipro River, the right bank of the Dnipro. So we say left and right bank in terms of the direction of the flow of a river. So the right bank is actually on the left-hand side. If you were looking down the river in the direction it flows, the right bank is this bank and the left bank is this bank. So it looks like, as far as war in Ukraine is concerned, that the Davidi Bridge salient and the one in the north have made further inroads than the ISW map suggests. The end result is that there are still three main areas of attacking Kherson, and they are slowly making progress. This area is being squeezed, and the more it gets squeezed, the more difficult it is to get all those troops off safely, because there is just simply no bridge left. The pontoons and ferries are being hit. The writing is on the wall. It's not like an Izium where they could all just run away in Balaklia, get on their bicycles, get in their cars and run away. Here, they are becoming, more trapped. And in fact, there's far less artillery fire from the Russians here, because it appears that they are running low on the supplies, which is, not surprising considering there is no way of getting them meaningful supplies. This is looking far more rosy for the Ukrainians. Obviously, it is attritional, so there are high numbers of losses on both sides. But anyway, that gives you an indication that things are looking pretty good for Ukraine there, even though it's a lot tougher. Whereas things elsewhere have pretty much been in stalemate as the Ukrainians take a breather. Interestingly, in Bakhmut, the Russians are making some advances, and in certain other areas, Avdiivka is also seeing some Russian advances. But there is some analysis to suggest that the more they advance here, the more problematic it's going to be later if the Ukrainians flank them and come down to try and take Donetsk, because they have further to go. So, again, the Russians here might be in a little bit of a dilemma. Do they just fortify as much as they can and think about, what's going to happen behind them? But it's almost as if these troops here can't think about up here, because otherwise they want to go and help them. If they go and help them, then, of course, it completely opens up the front line. So they just have to continue doing what they've been told to do. And because there is this kind of top-down, very centralized hierarchical system in the Russian army, whereas the Ukrainian army has been trained much more like the NATO way, which is to give NCOs and officers further down the hierarchical line more a greater ability to make their own decisions and react to what's going on the battlefield. That's not the case with the Russian army. So they are just continuing to do what they're doing. This is mainly the Wagner mercenaries sort of acting around these areas. I believe both areas. I may be wrong. There are areas where the Russians are still making advances, but there are areas where they are under the cosh. And as I mentioned, there's force possibly amassing down here. As you can see, some areas have been taken back. And Vuhledar, and up north, obviously, in the Kharkiv area. Now, there's been a New York Times article about what the preparations that went on before these two advances, and it's well worth a read. I'll give you a little bit of a summary, just a Twitter summary. So some interesting points from this New York Times article on the latest Ukrainian military gains. Initially, President Zelensky desired to launch the broad attack across the south to recapture Kherson and cut off Mariupol from the Russian force in the east. So originally, Zelensky wanted this to be about going towards Mariupol and cutting the front lines in two. So you've got the northeast and the north-south front line in the Donetsk area, and the east-west front line down in the southern area, and he wanted to sort of cut that in two. But the Ukrainian generals and the American officials believed that such an assault would result in immense casualties and would fail to retake large amounts of territory. So during the course of the planning, Ukrainian commanders started opening up more to American and UK intelligence officials and seeking advice. A war game held by American and Ukraine officials simulating the attack in the south also suggested that such an offensive would fail. Instead of one large offensive, Ukraine military then proposed two, one Kherson Oblast and then the other in the Kharkiv Oblast. So UK, American and Ukrainian officials conducted an assessment of the new plan, trying to wargame it once more. This time, officials from the three countries agreed it would work. For the counteroffensive, Ukraine sent America a detailed list of weapons, a shopping list if you like, needed for the attack, according to a Ukrainian officer. The attack in Kherson Oblast was never a feint or a diversion, according to people briefed on the plan. So this is really, really interesting. I've been calling this a feint because it is acted like a feint. So whether it was, and this is a question I was asking right at the beginning, I want to know whether this was originally decided to be a feint or not. So the idea is that so the Kherson counteroffensive, this attritional counteroffensive, acted as a feint, sucking in troops into this area. So they took their eye off defending elsewhere in Ukraine, and that enabled the Kharkiv offensive to meet very weak resistance and shoot through it at lightning speed. Now it's coming out that it wasn't a feint or a diversion, according to the people briefed on the plan. American officials insist that credit for the offensive lies fully with Zelensky and the Ukrainian military, which led a relatively small force in Kharkiv to an outsized victory. So yes, this is what we're learning now, is that the Kharkiv offensive was lightning quick, small force, not very well armoured, able to do all of that sort of, not quite damage, but success here, and capturing so much material that, you know, it's hugely embarrassing for the Russians, but with a relatively small force. And the larger force down here is caught up in an attritional warfare. But it wasn't a feint. My argument would be, well, it was a feint because that's what happened. That's how, whether you intended it to be a feint or not, it ended up acting as a feint. And that to me is fairly clear from what happened. So that's pretty interesting. What's also worth noting is that there's more and more evidence that the conscripts being brought in to supply or to reinforce certain areas, or the reinforcements, even if they aren't conscripts, have been taken from other places that reflect a desperation in the Russian army. So here we've got Trent Telenko, well worth following on Twitter. Russia is putting conscripts from the strategic rocket forces as infantry replacements in Ukraine. These are specialist troops needed elsewhere for stuff to do with rockets, being brought in to fight as on the ground, cannon fodder for the Russian army. And Ukraine just captured one of these Russian strategic rocket forces infantry replacement conscripts at Izium, and so there's an account given by this soldier and of this soldier. It's very, very interesting. It shows how desperate they are. And then there is another example. This is a POW, and I know it's a bit dodgy to have videos of POWs and so on, but. Another example of how desperate the Russian military is for manpower. This recently captured Russian POW is a sailor from the Baltic Fleet. So the Baltic Fleet is up near Sweden, Norway, so Denmark, that area. That's the Baltic Sea. The Baltic Fleet is a Russian fleet that operates around there, who was given just 1 week of tank training before he was assigned to a tank crew and shipped off to Ukraine. That is how desperate they are. So rather than do a national mobilization, they are trying all these other ways to get troops to the front lines in Ukraine, and it's failing. And as a result, people aren't happy back in Russia. So I talked to you previously about how there were 30 plus municipal deputies from St. Petersburg, Moscow, and other places who have called for Vladimir Putin to resign. And this chap here, again, I won't play you the video, but he basically says he's been overwhelmed by support. You know, a couple of people have threatened him, but basically he's been overwhelmed by support, people asking for selfies with him and stuff like that. I mean, this is a popular move coming out against Putin. And that's just fascinating. Again, you know, not something we would have expected months ago. And I will play you another clip from Russian TV, as I did yesterday. This is fascinating as well, and well worth listening to. And I will play the full sort of almost 2 minutes.
Нужна все-таки какая-то ясность в политическом решении украинского вопроса. Но надо признать, на мой взгляд, что украинский народ существует. Это первое, надо признать.
Не согласен с тем, что мы должны Украине приложить какую-то...
So again, this is similar to yesterday, or when I showed you a video from a few nights ago, where they were discussing. You know, one guy said we can't just, you know, say that certain people don't exist when they're standing in front of us and they've got their language of their own. Of course they exist, but this is what's literally being debated here, with some people saying, you know, these people don't exist, and then someone else arguing against that. I mean, to me, it's ridiculous to take the position that's being taken here, but by at least one of them. But it's really indicative of the sort of discussions that are going on in Russia now more openly.
Такую альтернативу ей предлагали, начиная с 91 года. Все постсоветское существование и было предложением такой альтернативы. Мы подарили вам государство, которого у вас не было. Вас не было как народа, мы подарили вам ощущение того, что вы народ.
По поводу признания наличия украинского народа. Это самая большая ошибка, которая существовала в нашей советской истории. Это все марксисты сделали.
That's like me in Britain saying, recognising the existence of Scottish people is the biggest mistake we ever made. Yeah, Scotland might get their independence, but do you know what? They are human beings with a right to self-determination. You can't just say a group of people have no right to think what they want to think and think they are who they want to be. You know, this is about the controlling, authoritarian nature of such a regime. To think that you can thought control people and stop them from their right to self-determination. It's, to me, this is absolutely abhorrent.
Ну, то есть нет украинского народа?
Нет. Украинского народа нет. Вам скажет любой историк. Любой историк вам это скажет, что его не существует. Признать существование. Спасибо. Откажусь.
So I could get all philosophical about this, saying a historian could tell you they don't exist. What's history got to do with whether some people feel they exist right now as a people? This is some kind of what in philosophy we call essentialism, that you know, that there is some essence of Russianness or Soviet Unionness, and that is correct and it can't be challenged. And actually, since Ukraine is deviating from this essence, it's wrong. Therefore, Ukraine doesn't exist. I mean, this is pure and simple essentialism. You see this in people who talk about biological sexes, male and female, and they're these things, these essences. And I don't want to get into all the long weeds of philosophy. But, you know, there's an awful lot more in human society that is constructed by the human mind than exists outside of the human mind, right? We construct our maps of reality out of the properties of things that exist. And there is if all humanity died, there would be no idea of what Ukraine was, what Russia was, what the Soviet Union was, what the UK is. Like, those are just ideas that we have created over time. And yeah, there's historical influence, but history may influence today, what we feel today, but it doesn't dictate what we should feel. So if Ukrainians want to get up and say, hey, we feel Ukrainian, we are Ukrainian, here's our flag, here's our culture, here's our language, then you can't deny that. You can't say you don't exist. Because they're saying, yes, we do. I exist and I am here. And in fact, I'm fighting you over that existence. It's just utterly ridiculous. It's like burying your head in the sand. It's like just it beggars belief, and it makes me want to go on a big rant. But this is what some of the Russian pundits are saying, and it's obviously must be this kind of philosophy and political philosophy that Putin is buying into.
А украинский язык есть?
Украинский язык,
Ну,
есть
значит,
диалект украинский, конечно.
Конечно, русский диалект.
Да,
Русский диалект, кстати, между прочим, очень долго в учебниках так и был.
It's not a language, it's a Russian dialect. Welsh isn't a language, it's just an English dialect.
Поставьте задачу.
Ну что вы глупости?
Поставьте задачу.
Конечно, есть украинский.
Вот есть, но как литература сконструирован.
Да.
Если мы будем сейчас вот так вот по этому поводу, значит, я могу сказать так, что по состоянию на вхождение там и Украины в состав России, и, кстати говоря, СССР в состав СССР, на этом так называемом языке говорило абсолютное меньшинство населения, которое сейчас объединено в территорию современной
Суть даже не в том, есть он или нет, а в том, что он был навязан искусственно.
Когда мы извне говорим украинцам, а вас нет, но согласитесь, по-моему, это не очень корректно.
Извне-то почему так? Подождите, это
Честно
наша
скажу,
одна
это
страна
чистой
была.
воды национализм. Ребят,
Ну,
так просто нельзя.
Нет,
Просто нельзя.
я сейчас...
And this is kind of an artificial distinction. You can't just say, it's not come from the outside. We're not telling them as an external people and an external entity to Ukraine that you don't exist. We are all one. Well, still, you are someone else telling someone that they don't exist in some kind of conceptual way. So it doesn't matter whether you're you are outside of those people. Your mind is outside of that mind. So, you know, you can draw your lines wherever you want, Russia and Ukraine or all part of the Soviet Union or whatever. You are telling people they don't exist and that their language is not a language, it's just a Russian dialect and they just are Russian. This is why you're not winning the war. Anyway, let us continue.
Восстанавливаем против себя целое население целого государства. Зачем мы это делаем?
Ну это полная ерунда.
Я вообще не понимаю,
Не хочу даться застрелить.
Не хочу даться застрелить. Для меня это пахнет национализмом. Я сказал свое слово.
And there you go. And actually, completely right. So that is pure nationalism of the worst kind, and that is really similar to essentialism in the philosophical sort of understanding of the terms. You know, that a particular nation has an essence, and then, you know, that is somehow, you know, factual and can't be changed. Yeah, so that's a fascinating interaction again from Russian television, which is indicative of the changing landscape because there are alternative views being put forward. Anyway, just before I finish, I want to just point out one last thing. This is something I said on previous videos, which is that the more you fire howitzers, these pieces of artillery, this is a self-propelled gun, so SPG, you get SPAAG, SPAG, which are self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. This is a self-propelled sort of howitzer that, you know, if you fire the barrel more and more and more without looking after the barrel or, you know, maintaining it or replacing it, it will do something like that. So you know, that the Ukrainians have captured this one now, but I mean, the question is, would they even be able to replace that barrel? You know, do they have the ability to replace a Soviet barrel like that is completely done in? And that's what happens if you don't look after your equipment. I mentioned Trent Telenko earlier on. This is from his thread. He is fantastic because I think he worked with the American Army with regard to sort of logistics and sorting out, you know, maintaining trucks and whatnot. In particular, he has had expertise on sort of truck tires earlier on in this campaign, in this conflict, and he wrote a significant amount on how poorly maintained the Russian trucks were and the Russian truck tires, to the point where it actually screwed up their own logistics and they were breaking down and getting stuck in the mud. And this is super important. So if you don't look after your maintenance, you don't spend time and money maintaining your equipment, you know, it will come back and bite you. This is and he's been great at pointing this out in many different contexts, because logistics is just as important as the equipment that you're fighting with. Because if you can't get ammunition for that equipment, and if you can't get fuel for that equipment, then that equipment is useless. So it's really important. if you're a fighting army, that you have really sound logistics as well as sound equipment. And it appears that the Russians have neither sound equipment nor sound logistics. And that has been a huge problem for them over the course of the war. Anyway, I thought I'd just add that little snippet in there. So in very quick summary, there are two things going on. What's going to happen along the Oskil River and along Lyman? And are we going to see a flanking of the Russians here? Again, we'll have to wait and see. That's going to be something to keep our eyes on very much over the next couple of days. And the other thing is what's going to happen with the Kherson front, the counteroffensive, attritional counteroffensive down here. Because if and when Russia lose Kherson, what's going to happen behind here? You've got a lot of partisan activity going on in Melitopol. Will that spell the end of the Russian campaign? If they lose Kherson, which means Crimea is then at risk, is that just the collapsing of the Russian front and the Russian war efforts? There are some people that think you lose Kherson, Russia, it's game over. So there you go. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and if you want, join the channel or give thanks down below. Any monetary contribution to the channel means that I can justify spending so much time doing this, and it's really, really important to me. But thank you anyway for watching. That's the main thing. Really appreciate all of your support, and until next time, toodle pips.